not just business, it's also geopolitics for sure. And in today's world, both go hand in hand. If you see how G7 had come together and they were putting the mantra of free trade, and so obviously it was based on business that they were coming together, but they were pushing the concept of free trade because they knew that at that point in time they had the industrial advantage. The moment they had the Asians and the rest of the world knocking on their doors with manufactured products, we saw one by one non-tariff trade barriers coming up in terms of ISO 9000, in terms of quality controls, in terms of now CBAM coming up, and so on and so forth. And to orchestrate these non-tariff trade barriers, the G7 had to be together. Now that we see that there is no other way that they can stop the imports from the rest of the world coming in, and they will be going back to the pre-Middle Ages in terms of their positioning in the global trade system, there is bickering happening within the G7. And therefore, it's important that India's voice is heard, that what we evolve from this existing architecture of geoeconomics is a new architecture wherein, as Professor Latham was mentioning, that other voices are heard. There are other major economies in the world, and there are peoples in the world whose voices need to be heard. And therefore, the new framework that gets created must have a very equitable voice. The moment the global architecture suppresses voice, it leads to conflict. That's what happened between World War I and World War II. As soon as Germany got suppressed, all the war costs were put on Germany. There was huge inflation in Germany that led to the creation of the Nazi Party, Hitler, and what happened subsequently. That's going to get repeated if we do not have a global mechanism where pressure is released, where there is equitable envisioning of how the world would look like, where a terrorism in any country is called a terrorism and it is not equated to a cause. If anything is equated to a cause, then there is no terrorism in the world. Let's stop using the word terrorism. In fact, if we look at the definition of terrorism by the United Nations, it basically says it's the killing of civilians to force a government in order to agree to a political situation. And if you go by the definition, the bombing of Dresden by the Allies was an act of terrorism. The killing of 100,000 people in Tokyo by bombing was an act of terrorism. The killing of 80,000 people in Hiroshima and subsequently in Nagasaki by the nuclear bomb were all acts of terrorism because they were aimed to kill civilians. And therefore, I see why there is a hesitance in the Western world to call such acts as terrorism. However, if there is a symmetrical affront on their soil, they're very quick to call that out as terrorism. And such a disparity in terms of the communication, in terms of perceptions, in terms of the frameworks, leads to conflicts. And which is why it's important that India is there. India pushes its message that this is not an age of war. India pushes its message that there is a new beginning in the world, and there needs to be all voices heard when we create that new structure which evolves from this current multipolar world that we're walking into.
You're absolutely right, Mr. Bhattacharya. In fact, I'm going to take this thought